You guys, okay, so this is what Genzuru is working on. And actually, the line art looks really good to me. Like, this drawing looks great. The proportions look good. I like the pose. Pretty solid. I don't have any problems with anything going on here right now. So, when it comes to deciding colors and stuff like that, here is how I would go about it from the beginning. Hey, Kookadoo! So a couple things. First off, I would suggest, and this is something that's been sort of shown to me recently, is I would suggest instead of starting with a white background, starting with a like around 50% gray background, like this. Let's see, how can I, yeah, there we go. Starting with a gray background. Because this way you're going to be able to, this is just when it comes to values, so I'm talking about lights to darks, you're going to be able to show darker shades and you're going to be able to show lighter highlights are going to pop out against this. So it's going to be a little easier to pick out the lights to darks. Thank you, Happy Otter. Yeah, I'm using Photoshop CC 2018 and I'm using Coloris plugin for the color wheel. Okay, so what I do, and this is sort of just, this doesn't have to do with the color, but just this is more of a process thing. I will then like make a selection of the whole figure. I don't know how you go about this part of your process, like if you just start painting in with a paintbrush or whatever. If for anyone who's listening in that's just interested in how I start my figures and stuff like that, this is what I do. So I just holding shift to add to a selection. I'm just using the lasso tool to make a huge selection of the entire body or whatever it is, like, you know, if it's an animal, if it's a person, if it's a bird. Just get the whole thing selected. So I'm just tracing on top of the sketch / line art that you created. It's actually nice and detailed. Shift to add selection, Alt to remove. Exactly. Super useful. Okay. So then I'll just take a like paint bucket or whatever you want. You can paint with a paintbrush too and just fill that in. So you have, actually I'm gonna go on another layer, not the background layer to do that. So you have everything, so you have one layer. Now the thing is, I want your sketch to be on top of that. Okay. So I had to put, because your sketch layer was like on a white background, I just had to put it on multiply so I could see it. But yeah, usually I'll put the sketch layer on top of it like this. And then I have now a layer that's like a flat color like that. Now there's two ways to go from here. There's two directions. You can either start shading in black and white, or you can start with a flat color that's actually a color and going in right with color. It depends on what you prefer. For me, I'm starting with the black and white is actually really nice for values, which means like it's really nice to be able to see if your shading is correct and things like that when it comes to lights to darks. But then once I go to actually colorizing that, I still have kind of a hard time with it. But yeah, basically you can do stuff like this. You can just come in and start figuring out where you want the light to hit and use the soft airbrush. Oops. I'm using a clipping mask for this too, so I should explain that real quick. I have this layer, and I can just make a new layer, right click and go to create clipping mask, or you can hold Alt and hover between the two layers and click down when you see that little square with the arrow, and it will clip the top layer onto the layer below it. So then you can, anything that you color in on that layer will only affect the layer below. So for me, what I often do, instead of starting in black and white, is whatever the skin color of the character is, I will make that the flat color that I use. Oops, let me lock the transparency. So I'll make that the flat color, and then start doing the shading like that, as if the character is naked. Of course, she's not really naked. We're not going to add any of those types of details, but it's an easier way for me to imagine the shading, like to do all those details like that. So you can either, so I'll just color pick from her skin and then go like to a little bit darker and maybe a little more red, depending on what I want the shadows to be, and just start shading in like that. Like wherever you think you want there to be shadow. Under the chin. Samus, so the armor is light blue. Okay, so what I do is, for me, and again, like, you can do whatever you want. But for me, I generally, in order to make my lights and darks, because that has a lot to do when you're talking about color selection, there's saturation, which is like how much pigment, I guess, is in a color. I don't know how, it's weird to explain it digitally, but there's saturation, there's hue, and then there's the value, there's like the light to dark. So there's a lot of different things that come into like how to choose a color. So for me, I like to limit the variables at the beginning. So by painting the whole thing with her in a skin color like this, so I can come in and bring some extra highlights, like where there might be really bright light hitting her. By not worrying about the color of her suit right now, it allows me to get some information with the values correct first before complicating it with the color. But color's coming next. So yeah, this is what I'll do. And then sometimes, yeah, I'll make a new layer and go to multiply mode. It's kind of like another way of doing shading where you're not exactly picking, you put the layer on multiply. You have to, when it comes to layer modes, you just have to play with them and see how they react with different colors. It's just going to take some experience before you kind of get comfortable with them. Welcome back, Hades Ash. It's Ashley. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty quick, but here's where we go from here. Yeah, neutral color Genzuru, like, and some people don't even use a color for this. Some people use black and white and they just do it in black and white and then they colorize it. I like to use a color like this because it's more easy for me to visualize it. Okay, then what I'll do is merge all this together as far as the just the flat part. Like the sketch still isn't on there yet. But then I'll go to the layer where everything's merged together and make a selection of the suit. So let's just do part of it to show the contrast. Let's say I wanted to give her, let's say I wanted to just colorize like this part of the suit. There's a bunch of ways to do this, but for me, yeah, I'll just make a selection of this part and then go to layer, new, layer via cut, or copy actually, layer, new, layer via copy. So if I click this off, you just have this right here. And there's a bunch of different ways you can colorize this. You can go to, you know, gradient map. Sometimes it's easy just to go, because I'm going to paint on top of this. So you can go to hue saturation and just like shift the hue into blue with this. You can add saturation, you can make it darker. You know, you can just like mess with this stuff a little bit. Then you can go to, you can mess with the curves, the color balance. If you want to go to color balance, you can go to the shadows and like add like, you know, a different tone to the shadow than the highlights, something like that. And then you have this on its own layer, so you can lock the transparency for this layer and do shading within this. So now, like, anything that you do will just affect this. So it's like like she's wearing the clothes for real. And then you can even go to this layer underneath with the skin and you can like add, you know, some shadows and stuff like that. How do you know where to put the highlights and shadows when you did this? Is it a matter of feeling it out? Yeah, like I just kind of, I just kind of mentally, I imagined that the light source was like up here coming down. And so you kind of imagine that it would hit like where it would be hitting. Yeah, it was just... Pan, thanks for the follow. Oh, thanks, Cow. Yeah, I did a Samus a little bit ago. Can show real quick. So anyway, that's it. But does anybody have any questions about this? Genzuru, are you good on this, or do you nailed the light source? Awesome. Do you have any other questions, or like I'm just gonna go back to painting the bird? Thanks. It's Jack, maybe? It's JCKK. You're welcome, you guys.